System initialization. Initiating the relaxation sequence. We are now accessing the database for HTTP status codes, the complete list. Allow the details to drift through your mind. There is no need to memorize. Just listen to the flow. The data stream begins. Dataset sequence status code 100, commonly known as continue. This is an interim response indicating that the client should continue with its request or ignore the response if the request is already finished. Moving to status code 101, which is defined as switching protocol. This status code is sent in response to an upgrade request header from the client. It indicates the protocol the server is switching to. Next, we have status code 102, referred to as processing. This is used to inform the client that the server has received and is processing the request, but no response is available yet. Continuing with status code 103, commonly known as early hints. This response is used to return some response headers before the final HTTP message. It allows the client to preload resources while the server prepares a response. Now examining status code 200, which is defined as OK. This is the standard response for successful HTTP requests. It indicates that the requested action was received, understood, and accepted. Proceeding to status code 201, referred to as created. This code indicates that the request has been fulfilled. It has resulted in one or more new resources being created. Moving to status code 202, commonly known as accepted. This status indicates that the request has been accepted for processing, but the processing has not been completed yet. Next, we have status code 203, which is defined as non-authoritative information. This indicates that the request was successful, but the enclosed payload has been modified from the origin server's 200 OK response. Continuing with status code 204, referred to as no content. This response indicates that the server has successfully fulfilled the request, and there is no additional content to send in the response payload body. Now, examining status code 205, commonly known as reset content. This code tells the client to reset the document view which sent this request. It is often used after form submissions. Proceeding to status code 206, which is defined as partial content. This status is sent in response to a range request. It indicates that the server is delivering only part of the resource due to a range header sent by the client. Moving to status code 207, referred to as multi-status. This response provides status for multiple independent operations. It is used in web dev contexts to convey information about multiple resources. Next, we have status code 208, commonly known as already reported. This is used inside a web dev response to avoid repeatedly enumerating the internal members of multiple bindings to the same collection. Continuing with status code 226, which is defined as IMUs. This code indicates that the server has fulfilled a GET request for the resource. The response is a representation of the result of one or more instance manipulations. Now examining status code 300, referred to as multiple choices. This status indicates that the request has more than one possible response, and the user agent should choose one of them. Proceeding to status code 301, commonly known as moved permanently. This response code means that the URI of the requested resource has been changed permanently. The new URI is given in the response. Moving to status code 302, which is defined as found. This code indicates that the URI of the requested resource has been changed temporarily. The client should use the same URI for future requests. Next, we have status code 303, referred to as See Other. This status directs the client to get the requested resource at another URI with a GET request. It is often used after a post operation. Continuing with status code 304, commonly known as Not Modified. This is used for catching purposes. It indicates that the response has not been modified, so the client can continue to use the same cached version. Now examining status code 305, which is defined as use proxy. This deprecated response code indicates that the requested response must be accessed by a proxy. Proceeding to status code 307, referred to as temporary redirect. This status directs the client to get the requested resource at another URI with the same method that was used in the prior request. Moving to status code 308, commonly known as permanent redirect. This means that the resource is now permanently located at another URI specified by the location header. Next, we have status code 400, which is defined as bad request. This response indicates that the server cannot or will not process the request due to something perceived as a client error. Continuing with status code 401, referred to as unauthorized. This status indicates that the request has not been applied because it lacks valid authentication credentials for the target resource. Now, examining status code 402, commonly known as payment required. This response code is reserved for future use. It was originally intended for digital payment systems. Proceeding to status code 403, which is defined as forbidden. This status indicates that the server understood the request but refuses to authorize it. Moving to status code 404, referred to as not found. This familiar response indicates that the server cannot find the requested resource. This is often due to a broken link or mistyped URL. Next, we have status code 405, commonly known as method not allowed. This response indicates that the request method is known by the server, but is not supported by the target resource. Continuing with status code 406, which is defined as not acceptable. This status is sent when the server cannot produce a response matching the list of acceptable values defined in the headers. Now, examining status code 407, referred to as proxy authentication required. This is similar to 401, but indicates that authentication must be done by a proxy. Proceeding to status code 408, commonly known as request timeout. This response indicates that the server would like to shut down this unused connection. Moving to status code 409, which is defined as conflict. This status indicates that the request conflicts with the current state of the server. This often occurs during put requests. Next, we have status code 410, referred to as gone. This response indicates that the requested content has been permanently deleted from the server with no forwarding address. Continuing with status code 411, commonly known as length required. This status indicates that the server refuses to accept the request without a defined content length header. Now examining status code 412, which is defined as precondition failed. This response indicates that one or more conditions given in the request header fields evaluated to false. Proceeding to status code 413, referred to as payload too large. This status indicates that the request entity is larger than limits defined by the server. Moving to status code 414, commonly known as URI too long. This response indicates that the URI requested by the client is longer than the server is willing to interpret. Next, we have status code 415, which is defined as unsupported media type. This status indicates that the server refuses to accept the request because the payload format is unsupported. Continuing with status code 416, referred to as range, not satisfiable. This response indicates that the range specified by the range header field cannot be fulfilled. Now examining status code 417, commonly known as expectation fail. This status indicates that the expectation given in the request's expect header field cannot be met by the server. Proceeding to status code 418, which is defined as I'm a teapot. This is a humorous status code from an April Fool's specification. It indicates that the server refuses to brew coffee because it is permanently a teapot. Moving to status code 421, referred to as misdirected request. This response indicates that the request was directed at a server that is not able to produce a response. Next, we have status code 422, commonly known as unprocessable entity. This status is used in web dev. It indicates that the request was well formed, but could not be followed due to semantic errors. Continuing with status code 423, which is defined as locked. This web dev response indicates that the resource being accessed is locked. Now examining status code 424, referred to as failed dependency. This web dev status indicates that the request failed because it depended on another request that also failed. Proceeding to status code 425, commonly known as too early. This experimental status indicates that the server is unwilling to risk processing a request that might be replayed. Moving to status code 426, which is defined as upgrade required. This response indicates that the server refuses to perform the request using the current protocol. Next, we have status code 428, referred to as precondition required. This status indicates that the origin server requires the request to be conditional to prevent the lost update problem. Continuing with status code 429, commonly known as too many requests. This response indicates that the user has sent too many requests in a given amount of time. It is used for rate limiting. Now examining status code 431, which is defined as request header fields too large. This status indicates that the server is unwilling to process the request because its header fields are too large. Proceeding to status code 451, referred to as unavailable for legal reason. This response indicates that the user requested a resource that is not available due to censorship or government-mandated blocking. Moving to status code 500, commonly known as internal server error. This generic error response indicates that the server encountered an unexpected condition that prevented it from fulfilling the request. Next, we have status code 501, which is defined as not implemented. This status indicates that the request method is not supported by the server and cannot be handled. Continuing with status code 502, referred to as bad gateway. This response indicates that the server, while acting as a gateway, received an invalid response from the upstream server. Now examining status code 503, commonly known as service unavailable. This status indicates that the server is not ready to handle the request. This is often due to maintenance or overload. Proceeding to status code 504, which is defined as gateway timeout. This response indicates that the server, acting as a gateway, did not receive a timely response from the upstream server. Moving to status code 505, referred to as HTTP version not supported. This status indicates that the HTTP version used in the request is not supported by the server. Next, we have status code 506, commonly known as variant, also negotiates. This response indicates that the server has an internal configuration error regarding transparent content negotiation. Continuing with status code 507, which is defined as insufficient storage. This web dev status indicates that the server is unable to store the representation needed to complete the request. Now examining status code 508, referred to as loop detected. This web dev response indicates that the server detected an infinite loop while processing the request. Proceeding to status code 510, commonly known as not extended. This status indicates that further extensions to the request are required for the server to fulfill it. Moving to status code 511, which is defined as network authentication required. This response indicates that the client needs to authenticate to gain network access. System shutdown. We have reached the end of the dataset. All entries have been processed. The data stream is now complete. Systems entering rest mode. Sleep mode engaged. Good night.